Ducati is selling us a story, quite literally. They tell us their dominance in MotoGP is the absolute pinnacle of engineering, the Olympus of motorcycle racing, the summit no one can reach. But there's a small problem. More than half a century ago, another Italian brand did something far more outrageous. 17 consecutive 500 cubic centimeter world titles. MV Agusta. Yes, 17. Today, half the paddock complains because Ducati fills the grid. Winglets, ride height devices, systems that lower the bike under acceleration. A 6-axis IMU processing more data per second than the computer that sent humans to the moon. And yet, the real history of motorcycle racing smells like something else. Castor oil, hot metal, and a few rather questionable decisions made in Italian boardrooms. Because the uncomfortable question is this: was MV Agusta's dominance the greatest stroke of genius in championship history, or the biggest monopoly racing has ever seen? Let's take it apart. The year is 1956. The premier class belongs to Gilera, Piaggio's giant. Powerful engines, budget, experience, complete control of the championship. And then, MV Agusta arrives, with an inline 4-stroke, 65 horsepower at first, eventually pushing 80. Today that sounds almost ridiculous, but at the time, it was dynamite. There was no electronics, no traction control, no anti-wheelie, no engine maps, just steel, combustion, and riders with more courage than common sense. Tubular frames, they flexed under braking, narrow tires, primitive suspension, and speeds creeping dangerously close to 250 kilometers per hour. One mistake, and the race ended in the infirmary, or worse. Then a name appears, John Surtees, 22 years old. He climbs onto the MV Agusta, wins the first 3 races of the championship, and then he simply manages the gap. It wasn't dominance, it was humiliation. But then something happens, something that would change motorcycle racing forever. The Japanese wake up. And when Soichiro Honda decides to enter the World Championship, he enters all the way. Precision engineering, industrial budgets, and an almost obsessive need to win. Suddenly, the old Italian inline 4 starts to struggle. Too much inertia, too much weight, slow direction changes. The Japanese bikes were beginning to dance through the corners, while the MV fought against its own mass. So in Varese, they make a decision, a radical one. They create the famous 500 triple, the legend. 3 cylinders, more compact, less rotating mass, more agility. It sounds like a technical revolution, but the reality is less romantic. The first version wasn't even truly a 500. It was basically a modified 350, an engine of roughly 420 cubic centimeters, stretched, pushed, adapted just to survive in the premier class. Italian engineering, genius, or brilliant improvisation. And yet it worked. It worked almost too well, because that engine would go on to dominate the championship for years. But this is where the story becomes uncomfortable, because the official books tell the pretty version, the heroic version. What they don't tell you is what was really happening inside the paddock.
Because by the time MV Agusta was approaching its 10th consecutive title, the empire was already starting to crack. The triple was at its limit. Reliability wasn't perfect, costs were exploding, and Honda had the bike to dethrone them. And they also had the rider, Mike Hailwood, the bike, one of the most absurd talents this sport has ever seen. Everything was ready for a change of era. Honda had the technology, the speed, and the ambition. But then something strange happens, very strange. Honda announces it is withdrawing from the 500 class, overnight. And not only that, they make an even more brutal decision. They pay Hailwood £50,000 of the time, a fortune. For what? So he wouldn't race for anyone else. Yes, so he wouldn't sign with another team. So he would disappear from the championship. A perfect vacuum, the biggest rival, gone. The rider capable of winning, gone. And MV Agusta, alone. Racing with virtually no opposition. It's much easier to stack titles that way. But the story still hides one final betrayal.
one of the most elegant in motorcycle racing history. Giacomo Agostini, the most decorated rider of all time, the crown jewel of MV Agusta. For years, he was their ultimate weapon, their race-winning machine. But inside the garage, the relationship was slowly rotting. Too much money, too much control, too much authority from Count Agusta, and very little freedom for the star rider. Agostini had enough, and he started looking elsewhere. Meanwhile, in Japan, Yamaha was preparing something dangerous, very dangerous. Two-stroke engines, lighter, simpler, and brutally explosive on acceleration. Agostini saw it before anyone else. The future wasn't in Italian four-strokes, it was in Japanese two-strokes. So in 1974, he did the unthinkable. He signed with Yamaha, and that move ended the empire. MV Agusta's own hero was the one who drove in the final stake, a perfect vendetta, at more than 250 kilometers per hour. And this brings us to the uncomfortable debate. Today, Ducati dominates MotoGP. Savage corner speed, an enormously powerful engine, aerodynamics refined to the millimeter, flawless quickshifters, electronic maps that change corner by corner, and 8 bikes on the grid. It's industrial efficiency, modern engineering, data, algorithms, total control. And yet, there's something Ducati will probably never repeat: MV Agusta's 17 consecutive titles. Not because they lack the ability, but because today, the system wouldn't allow it. Manufacturer concessions, technical regulations, frozen aerodynamics, artificial balance across the championship. Modern motorcycle racing is designed to avoid monopolies, to guarantee a fight, to make sure nobody dominates for too long. In the 1960s, none of that existed. If you were the strongest, you crushed everyone. And if your rival withdrew, well, you just raced alone. An uncomfortable history, but the real one. So now I'll leave you with the question, the one that truly divides fans. What deserves more respect? MV Agusta's 17 consecutive titles in an era full of withdrawals and empty grids? Or Ducati's current dominance fighting against giant factories in the age of millimeter-perfect technology? I'll read you in the comments. No fanboy wars, just arguments. This is Countersteer Theory, Throttle, and Judgment.